Hello, Year 11. Today we are looking at the economic and the political. We've already had a look at the social structure of Russia and how that inequality, the social inequality, contributed to a lot of the discontent, particularly among the poor in Russia. We are going to look today at the economic situation and the political situation, both of the big factors which contributed to the Russian Revolution and to the fall of the Romanovs in 1917. Okay, so again we're looking here at the economic situation in Tsarist Russia, the political discontent as a result of that economic situation. We'll look quickly at the revolutionary ideas circulating at this time which influenced the rise of revolutionary political parties in Russia. But first, the economic situation. Then we have a look at the 1897 census. Remember, we can see it from this pie chart here, and we've looked at it in your booklet. This is a breakdown of social structure. You can see there's not a lot of economic progression in the population. You see here you've got the social classes, you've got the urban middle class, and you've got the industrial working class, 1.5% say, and 4%, versus the overwhelming majority, 82%, who are agricultural workers. So 82% of the population is still working the land and working in agriculture as opposed to working in industry. So you can see here the economy is not going to be growing very quickly. Okay. So in every respect, really, Russia was a backward and outdated agricultural society when we compare it to Britain and Germany. Okay, they were, remember, Britain industrialized in 1750, okay, a good 150 years before Russia, and Germany about 1870 when it unified and became a nation. Okay, the situation is made worse because Russia has really poor transport networks, all right, so people can't get around also to work in cities perhaps and to work in these factories. There isn't a lot of money or available capital to attract foreign investment into Russia. But there's hope. Okay, change is afoot. Sergei Witte, introducing Sergei Witte, Minister of Finance for Russia from 1893 to 1903. He's been described as the architect of Russia's industrialization. His job was to modernize Russia's industry to improve its military strength by attracting foreign investment into Russian industry, by expanding the railway system to a dramatic degree in order to improve trade, to improve exports, communication. You remember Russia is that vast expanse, remember that map, to improve the communication across the continent and improve the movement of troops in the event of war. So how he did this was he sought advice from experts in modern countries like Britain and Germany. He did face some huge challenges, okay? Russian industrial practices were very backward, okay? So that always takes some time to change things if it's been like that for a long time. And also some people in Russia, in royal circles, for example, distrusted Witte and tried to sabotage and undermine what he was trying to do. In many ways, they may have been successful because the Tsar sacked him and replaced him with Peter Stolypin, who we'll look at a little bit later. So here I am again harping on about the Trans-Siberian Railway, and I'm harping on about it because it was really important, okay? The Trans-Siberian Railway was Sergei Witte's baby. It was built under his leadership, okay, and it was one of his shining achievements as Minister of Finance. It stretched from Moscow in the west to Vladivostok in the east, so that's more than 9,000 kilometers in distance. He really believed that trains encourage social mixing, and it was really good for the culture of Russia. So he says here, a railway is a ferment that causes cultural brewing, and even if it encounters a completely wild population on its way, it can quickly civilize it to the necessary level. So that quote is quite telling about how he felt on trains. The railways and trains are symbols of modernity. Okay, towns without train stations were considered destined to be backwaters. Okay, you have the famous Russian writer Anton Chekhov wrote in a letter that in Western Europe people die because their space is cramped and suffocating. In Russia, they die because the space is an endless expanse. Trains and railways do have significant military importance, okay? The railways are really crucial for transporting troops to the borders in times of war, as I said before. This is especially crucial for Russia because Russia is so massive, okay? The job of a railways chief was one of the most important in the country, and Sergei Witte was one of the key ministers in the Tsar's council, and after the revolution, the job of the railways chief fell to Trotsky over here. Here he is, who was also in charge of the Red Army. There is some historical debate as to the success of Witte's reforms, but overall I think the Russian economy was stabilised and there was a dramatic increase in industrial production. We can see this in the stats here. You have iron and steel production increasing by more than 800%, coal output tripled, you have the textiles industry increasing its production by 2/3, and you can see the industrialization's effect on the cities. You have Moscow being the fastest growing city outside of New York, one of the 10 biggest cities in the world. St. Petersburg also almost doubled its population in, in 20 years between 1890 and 1910. In terms of getting the foreign investment, I think we can say that was a success as well. You have a look at this, 98 million rubles in 1880 before he was in charge to 911 million rubles in 1900. That's a tenfold increase almost in foreign investment in that space of time in 20 years, which is remarkable. Socially, however, industrialization did have some not so good effects on the Russian people, and you've seen this in the sources that you're looking at in your booklet in class. Like other industrial countries, the workers suffered from really poor working conditions and living conditions. As a result, there was severe overcrowding. We saw that in the lodging houses that they lived in, really unhygienic, no privacy, and they didn't get paid very well as well, and they were taxed quite heavily. There is also criticism that the industrialization didn't do enough to address the agricultural needs of Russia. Russia was still really backward and still using really backward ploughing techniques to work the land, really labor intensive. So, and later on, Peter Stolypin, who replaced Sergei Witte, his reforms would try and address this issue. But in the meantime, this impact is going to have huge political consequences in Russia. The economic impact, the industrialization and modernization process came at a very high cost, a very high human cost. Now we're going to have a look at the political discontent in Tsarist Russia as a result of industrialization. We know that people were unhappy about the political and social situation in Russia. We know there was major social and economic problems for the workers and for the peasants. We looked at this in the sources in your booklet. Okay, they've got minimal rights and harsh living conditions and no opportunities to improve their lot in life. Industrialization in Russia, as mentioned previously, was happening about 150 years behind Britain. While this was all going on, revolutionary ideas were circulating at the time that would become hugely influential. And I just want to take some time to go through an ideology that was kicking around in the background, which was Marxism. Okay, we need to have a solid understanding of Marx's ideology, which is a set of beliefs and ideas that characterize this particular revolutionary or inspired the revolutionary movement. We need to know about this so that we can understand why revolutionaries such as Lenin and Trotsky devoted their whole lives trying to implement it in Russia. It's absolutely key to understanding the Russian Revolution. So, Year 11, what is Marxism? So this is Karl Marx, over here, and together with his friend Friedrich Engels, together they were the brainchilds of Marxism. Okay, Marx's revolutionary spirit was born out of studying the French Revolution as a journalist in Paris. Both Marx and Engels visited the factories in England, and basically they saw the effects of industrialization on the people, particularly the workers. They could see that, back in those days, children were also working in those factories. They could see that their children were becoming deformed while working in the factories. They saw rampant disease, malnutrition, the horrible working conditions that you read about in your sources, and all for what? To make the bourgeoisie, or the factory owners, the industrialists, wealthy. And the largest cost in terms of running a factory was often, or to having a business or an enterprise, is often the wages. So the factory owners often drove down the wages in order to increase their profits. And Marx and Engels thought that this was really unjust, and they believed that this would only change if there was a radical solution to it. It's not going to change by itself, and that they could see that this was happening in Germany as well. Marx and Engels studied the history of the world's economies, and they saw that countries developed in stages. So let's have a look at that. Marx and Engels thought that society was continually evolving as more efficient methods of production were invented and as society's demands changed. So they came up with this idea that saw history as a series of class struggles between those who controlled the production, such as the employers, and those who didn't, such as the employees. So Marx actually thought that communism would happen in Britain first because capitalism and the Industrial Revolution started there first, and they were so far ahead of Russia. When we're in class, we're going to deconstruct these isms: feudalism, capitalism, socialism, communism. We're going to look at that in more depth and look at the differences between them, but I just wanted to give you this big picture overview, okay? So Marx thought that eventually this history would go up to, we're now in the capitalist stages, for example, that would eventually be overthrown, and you'd have socialism, which would eventually naturally evolve to communism. So Marx and Engels documented their ideas and their theory in 1848 in their Communist Manifesto, which sets out all their philosophical answer to society's problems, which was communism. And what communism was a new political system. Okay, it's a new political system that says that industry, capital, land, and all other means of production are owned and controlled by the community as a whole. Okay, there's no private ownership whatsoever. The communist society is classless. Everybody's equal, and each person gets resources according to his or her needs. Okay, and they're provided for equally by society. Interestingly though, Marx did not actually give us any description of what life under communism would look like, and it would take Lenin to illustrate what life under communism would be like, and we call that Leninism. Okay, now that we've looked at Marxism, we're going to look at the revolutionary political parties that sprung up around about this time, who were all influenced by the ideology of Marxism. There is definitely a clear link between between education and revolution. Universities were at the heart of it all. They were the centre, the heart of opposition to the Tsarist regime since the 1860s. In the Russian language, the words student and revolutionary were almost synonymous. Why? The thing I want to impart to you today is a very important one, and that is that the history of the revolutionary movement is the history of the intelligentsia. Okay, the revolution was not led by the peasants. They couldn't read, they couldn't write. Most of the revolutionary leaders were first and foremost intellectuals who could read the Communist Manifesto. Okay, they were highly literate. Okay, Lenin over here was a literature buff. He was a voracious reader who devoured the classics. Trotsky over here his nickname was the pen. That's how good he was at writing. Their heads were full of European literature, and they were especially influenced by the history of the French Revolution of 1789 and 1848. Okay, the students, like everyone else in Russia at this time, were politicized by the sheer scale of human misery from the Russian famine of 1891. And also, they were also moved by the plight of the industrial workers. Okay. Interestingly, historian Orlando Figi says he suggests that the guilt of intellectuals who were painfully conscious of their wealth and privilege. Remember, the intelligentsia were the upper class and the middle classes, and he said that this guilt was the psychological inspiration of the revolution. Okay, I want to take a look now quickly at the two revolutionary parties that were considered Marxists or socialists. Okay, they were the ones that were heavily influenced by Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, and later on we're going to look at the liberals or the more right-wing conservative parties because they sprung up after the 1905 revolution. So these two were active before the 1905 revolution. We'll look at the 1905 revolution and then we'll look at the liberals after that because I think that would make more sense. Okay, we'll look at the first one, and that's the Social Revolutionary Party. The Social Revolutionary Party had the longest political tradition of any party. They came about and were created by the economic reforms under Alexander II in the 1860s. Okay, their members and the support base were mostly peasants and some of the urban working class. They really believed that the peasants were crucial to the revolution, and this made them the main political party of rural Russia. They were overwhelmingly popular all over Russia, and in 1917 they would have a majority in the Duma. In fact, Kerensky, over here, would later become Prime Minister in 1917. Okay, so Kerensky actually was a lawyer. Again, the intelligentsia, all right, developed the base for this political party. They were fighting for land ownership for the peasants. They were endorsing violence to overthrow the Tsar, and this is one of the key differences between them and some of the other parties that we'll look at. They were, or a branch of this party was responsible for some terrorist acts between 1901 and 1905. They wanted to introduce representative federal and local governments that allowed for universal male suffrage, which is the male vote. Okay, women couldn't vote. Their emphasis really was on the rural communities and granting them independence. Economically, they wanted to socialise all the privately owned land and redistribute it to democratically organised communities. Their legacy, well, they split up into left-wing and right-wing factions, okay, but they still remained the revolutionary group with the largest following until the Bolsheviks outlawed this particular party when they came to power. Okay, Year 11, we're going to have a look at the other Marxist group, political party, probably the most famous one, the Social Democratic Workers' Party. It was established in 1898 by George Plekhanov, who was really influenced by the spread of the Marxist principles and ideas throughout Russia. Unlike, though, the Social Revolutionary Party, the SD Party really believed that the urban working class was the key to revolution, not the peasants. Okay, again, as we talked about, the intelligentsia developed the base of this party. You've got the key leaders of Lenin, Martov and Trotsky, and they later on split up into two groups, the Mensheviks, who were in the minority, and the Bolsheviks. And the Bolsheviks would later seize power in the October Revolution and become the Communist Party in 1918, which we'll definitely look at a bit later. Okay, that concludes our seminar for today. In our next lesson, we'll look at the 1905 Revolution and look at Bloody Sunday, the Bloody Sunday Revolt.